Welcome to Pass the Torch, a Tacoma Poet Laureate Celebration. I'm Chevy Chung. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the honor of serving the Tacoma Poet Laureate program. We acknowledge that we rest on the lands of the Puyallup people, where they make their home and speak the Lushootseed language. We acknowledge that the standard of living many of us in the United States enjoy today, that is disproportionately enjoyed by white people, is directly linked to the stolen labor and people extracted via kidnapping and torture of millions of Africans, African Americans, and Black people for more than 10 generations. We acknowledge all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented peoples who contributed to the building of the country and continue to serve within our labor force. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. Pass the Torch is happening because of the support and love from Tacoma Public Library. Moore Branch, Quinn Arnold, TV Tacoma, Tacoma Arts Live, Right 253, and all of you, and you on Facebook as well. Now, I invite you to increase your presence through listening. I invite you to increase your presence through reflection this evening. And help me welcome our current Poet Laureate, Lydia K. Valentine, who is passing the torch to Christian Paige. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. First, I'd like to thank the city of Tacoma, the people of Tacoma, Tacoma Arts Commission, Right 253, Blue Cactus Press, King's Bookstore. If you're not shopping at King's, I don't know, you need to shop at King's. Naomi Strom Avila, all former poet laureates, including Lucas Smeraldo, Kelly Richardson, and Abby Murray, the Black Poet Laureates group on Facebook, and my family and friends. Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna start out with two poems. One is one that I wrote and it was published right at the beginning of my tenure as Poet Laureate. And the last is a poem that I wrote for my first in-person performance at Tacoma Pride a couple years ago. When I became Poet Laureate, we were in quarantine and locked down, and that was awesome for me as an introverted, autistic person with ADHD. But it is a poem that I do love to read. I welcome Christian up, and he will perform for us and for himself as the incoming Poet Laureate, and then we're just going to be in conversation. Here we go. Speaking in tongues. When they come in this time, in this place, Namular socialists are not first. The strange flotsam jettisoned with guns, garbage bag nooses, metal-lined vans, and more guns are named Amadou and Oscar, Trayvon and Michael, Sandra and Tamir, to hashtag say the name of a few. In this time, in this place, our rage-full voices spill out in protest, but the dam you fashion from concrete blocks of denial, detraction, disbelief, disinterest, denial, detraction, disbelief, disinterest, denial, detraction, disbelief, disinterest, stops the viscous swamp of our agony from reaching you. While you watch from the banks of privilege, we wade in water as thick and ropey as clotted dreams. To live while Black, to marry who we love, to use the bathroom in peace, to keep pipelines out of ancestral lands, to escape landmines, genocides, and other thieves that steal our children and grandmothers. We wade in the water trying to have the breath to live, the peace to live, the unendangeredness to simply live. Our light bright to midnight skin warps and prunes. The water stirs and pulses with our voices, our steps, and pushes against your concrete impassivity. You look away and begin to consider. Blustery defensiveness stops any progress, but you begin to consider the sandbags you stacked and keep on hand to righteously protect your position. But now, in this time, in this place, now the shore deteriorates beneath you. You who had stood so certain, so safe before. Now you reach out your hand, hoping to share in our buoyant resilience. Now you speak out in confusion and fear, beginning to imagine the torment of drowning by degrees in the sputum of ruptured justice and democracy. You remind, no, scold us, that movements are stronger when we come together, even though the barrier between us was built by your hands. And we are asked, no, admonished, to disregard that dam and the damning consequences of your past silence, even though the raw meat smell of our children's blood clings to both. Forgive and forget slithers smoothly from transgressors' tongues. You present these nonsense syllables as if you're an oracle of the divine, but your purpose, your ploy, is far from holy. I know. Still, I will raise my hands from the chest-deep depths I have come to know. I will reach across the rough concrete of your ignorance and help you stand in your new waterlogged reality, in your pool that barely reaches the knee. I dare you to call yourself a survivor. Love, a new definition. I am an English teacher and a grammar nerd. You should know that. Love, action verb, intransitive. To work actively, directly, or indirectly, regardless of personal benefit, in opposition of hate. Hate in any form, hate from any source, including yourself. Neither Merriam nor Webster signed off on this definition. It didn't leap from the catalog of Shakespeare's lexiconic creations. The days when dead white men deliver our truth are over. There is no ambiguity in this meaning that I offer you here. Unlike the cloudy quagmire of tome-bound definitions like love, to feel deep affection for. Who determines the adequate depth for a feeling to be deemed deep? And affection means fondness, which means affection. Love is more than a candy-coated confection. It is the cleansing fire and soaring flight of a dragon armored in grace. You may be mentally retreating to the safety of the directive, choose your battles wisely. I say we are where we are now because of that cubic zirconia piece of advice. Because people see their battles as separate from or often against their neighbors. Because people cherry pick the shiny issues plumped up on the limbs of the trees that grow in their yards and ignore the fact that those trees are only possible because of the soil toiled and tended for generations by the original stewards of these lands. The bones, and the roots have been watered and continue to be watered by the lifeblood of Black and brown people. To love is not to pick your battles wisely, but to know that all of our battles are the same battle, and to pick your tactics wisely. March or make sandwiches, shout or sing, fundraise or film, love. Set boundaries, see things through, stay informed, stay hydrated, love. Take your time, but take a step. Take your meds, take a chance, love. Say thank you when someone holds the door for you. Tacoma. Y'all gotta do better. Say thank you when someone holds the door for you. Say I'm sorry. Say no. Love. Hold someone's hand. Hold someone's heart. Hold folks accountable for their words and deeds against others. Hold another's burden just for a moment, just for a breath. Just let them breathe. The universe is holding you. Love. Listen, laugh, live. Live even when you don't know how. You are a gift. You are meant. Live. Love. Let go of the toxic, even if it came from your mama, even if it came from your church, even if it comes from within. Love. Remember your name. Remember your worth. Remember your selfness that lives, regardless of relationship or real estate. Love. Love wins because to love is to fight for all of us, and the war is never over. Thank you. I think I may have forgotten to thank Chevy Chung, who introduced me. And Chevy does not enjoy the spotlight, but truly I could not have made it through these 2 years without her. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing and the privilege of introducing Christian Paige. Christian Paige is an Emmy-nominated spoken word poet, a professional speaker and educator who speaks at schools, conferences, and events across the United States. Paige has spoken to hundreds of thousands of people and loves to work with young people who are committed to doing good in the world. Paige is a first-generation college graduate and is passionate about community, anti-racism, equity, and empowerment. He has spent his entire career in and around education, advocating for historically marginalized populations and working to create equitable environments where young people can thrive. He provides motivation, inspiration, encouragement, and truth through school assemblies, professional development sessions, conference notes, keynotes, community gatherings, and poetry performances. Paige's work has appeared on national stages, on television, and in museum exhibits. He is one of the top speakers in the Pacific Northwest and is in demand nationally. However, Paige believes there is no place like home. He was born and raised in Tacoma, Washington. He believes that our voice is our most powerful tool and encourages others to use their voice to advocate, interrupt, empower, and teach. Christian often uses one sentence to summarize himself. He says, "I am just a somebody who wants community to work for everybody." I am so pleased and so proud to introduce Christian Paige.
Yo, good evening, family. I thought like 2 people were from Tacoma in the building. Good evening, family. Awesome. So y'all know some of the rules, right? My first decree. No, I'm joking. But no, in all seriousness, right? Like, I grew up in a community that when you talk to folks, they talk back to you, right? I grew up in a space where call and response has shown up in every place that I've been in. And one of the rules that we've always had is don't ever leave somebody up there by themselves. And so I heard some ums while my sister Lydia was sharing. Please don't feel like you have to be quiet in this space with the art that's being shared. As a matter of fact, you should probably do the opposite. As long as I'm in the room, right, like you got permission to do so. As was shared in my bio, my name is Christian Paige. I'm so honored to have this position, to be in this space, to be able to share art with the city that I've known, that I've loved, that's raised me, that's poured into me, and now that I find myself in a position of giving back. The 2 pieces that I want to share with you all tonight, both are really near and dear to me. One is a really loving piece, and I have to warn y'all up front, the other one is a little bit spicy. Right? I hope that you're prepared, right? Either you'll like it or you'll love it, and if not, we can have a conversation in the parking lot. But both of these pieces are really near and dear to me. The first really comes from this idea, and some of you may have an understanding. I love that we acknowledge the land that we stand on, but I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is to keep the knowledge of the First Nations and Indigenous people alive. And some of the most pertinent information, some of the best proverbs that I've heard, right, center around this idea of the seventh generation. Is anybody familiar with this? There's like 3 people. I got to holler at your history teachers. But the idea essentially says this, is that the decisions that I make in this world should honor the 7 generations that come before me and should make way for the 7 generations that come after me. And when I understand that the work that I do and the decisions that I make are legacy decisions and legacy work, I might move differently in this world. And so this first piece is in honor of my daughter, for the 7 generations that will come after me, for my children's children. And I wrote this piece, my daughter's, she said, and me? Yeah, baby. Right. My daughter's name is Zion Kekona Pidiahi Ka'omoana Oke Kai Paige. Her name means powerful woman and voyager of the sea. And I wrote this poem after I heard her heartbeat for the first time. And it changed the way that I see the world. It changed the way that I move in the world. And it helped me understand. I've always been able to honor my elders, but I think it's helped me understand the second half of what I find to be important about honoring the 7th generation. Can I share this piece with y'all? All right. Y'all gonna leave me here by myself? No. Oh, y'all know the rules. We're good. So the poem would read, I remember asking for you. I remember whispering your name over the ends of my fingertips while I spoke to God. I remember hearing your heartbeat, playing it on repeat. Your bass lines and drum beats convinced me that you had already sat at the feet of your ancestors. You sounded like soul music, like a live band, like the opening track to an album that I'd never heard, but it always been my favorite song. I'm just glad that you're an artist. I can tell by the hieroglyphs written on the sides of your mother's abdomen, only a fool would call them stretch marks. I call them stencils, giving you the ability to trace your existence back to your first home, the evidence of your first miracle, the mosaic of majestic maternity perfectly, purposely providing you with certainty that your mother's body sat at the precipice of your eternity internally. I hope that you understand your brilliance. That resilience is written in the fabric of your being, that your bloodlines know the full spectrum of freedom and captivity and will only accept the former, have navigated uncharted waters, have taken disconnected islands and made them a nation. I can tell by your heartbeat that you have torch-bearing hands, shoulders built for a legacy, and a smile that can inject joy into decaying dreams. I can tell by your heartbeat that you will groove like your grandfathers, that you will hammer dance when the world tries to tell you to two-step. I can tell by your heartbeat that you will love like your grandmothers, living perfectly at the intersection of honesty and agape. I can tell by your heartbeat that your laughter will become the soundtrack to my favorite memories, and I'll be ready for the days that your tears ask the whys of this broken world, for the times that your spirit won't accept the reasonless no's, the first time that you challenge a false narrative shot in your direction. They will try to call you an activist. I will tell them that you were just raised properly, that you're only accustomed to knowing the truth. Your Genesis will bring me revelations. My mistakes will become our lessons. And when they try to tell us the broken stories of Black fathers, the naive narrative of absence, I will play them, your living drum patterns, and lay down my vocals to the tune of our rewritten narrative. And I will tell them that I remember asking for you, that I whispered your name over the ends of my fingertips. And your heartbeat is the evidence that God can make fatherhood sound like music. Thank you. Thank you all. Can I be honest with y'all for a second? Yeah. If y'all said no, there wasn't a plan B. I debated what the second piece I was going to share with you was going to be. I went back and forth about, right, like, you know, this is a city position, and should I share it with, or will I ruffle some people's feathers, or will we, right, find ourselves in this position? I don't know if y'all have ever had to do that dance before clocking into your job. I came to talk to y'all today. Right? Some of us have that conversation with ourselves in the car every day. And what I want to offer to you all is that the second piece felt really true to me. Can I talk really spicy to you? I had a conversation with my brother, John Gaines, who's in the room. We used to run. We don't be running now. We used to run in the mornings, right? And we were talking about the fear, right, of running in places while Black, right, of finding ourselves in certain, right, and regardless of if people find that fear founded or not, it's a real experience that I think that I have every day. And I remember waking up when Tyree died. Those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, right, there was a young man whose life was taken at the hands of the police. And I don't want to, right, like replay the trauma in our heads or any of these things. I think Instagram does that enough. But the reality of the situation, right, is like there's some fears that show up. There's some sadness that shows up. There's some difficulties that show up. And I don't know that everybody has this experience. And if you don't, right, particularly can I talk really spicy for a second? For educators maybe who are in the room, of understanding that brown and Black boys walk into your classroom every day. And sometimes they wake up and see themselves or someone who looks like them lose their life at the hands of someone who might be there to protect them. And so I wrote this poem, no shots, no shade, no anything, just about the experience of waking up in the morning on some of these days. Can I read this piece to you? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. All right, some of y'all might not like me after this one. I'm just putting it out into the world. Is it fair? All right. The poem would read, wakes up hella Black, stretches one of them good stretches like Unc before he accepts the challenge to race them kids, exits bed Black, takes off bonnet or do-rag or headscarf, lets locks remember who they were before being asked to comply, checks Instagram. Does that thumb work out? Feeds feed addiction. Realizes name and city trending. Watches video. Looks in mirror. Sees reflection in both places. Tyree, George, Tamir, Botham. Imagines who they were before being commanded to comply. Wonders why internet censors language in the comment section but plays executions on a loop alarm clock. Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Sit down. Some of y'all don't know that song. Plays loudly through pocket-sized speakers again, because I set 10 different alarms 5 minutes apart from each other, because on days like this, I'd rather press snooze than be awake. Devastated, dejected, dehumanized. Black boy experiences depression. Black boy hears Black voice yell very loudly in his Black head, say depressed again. And I'll give you something to be depressed about. Remembers that depression has never really belonged to us. That vulnerability is too expensive when the budget for your humanity is 3/5 of your counterparts. That mental health was mythology that you weren't allowed to read. Remembers survival, remembers resilient, remembers daddy, grandma, ancestors, resistance, dreams, ding. Black phone gets blue message, group chat, white friend, did you see the video yet? Remembers video, remembers reflection, ignores text, puts on Black armor, presents as fine, leaves house Black, moves like magic, moves through the world, remembers world. Remembers staff room or classroom or boardroom, remembers presentable, has to answer questions in a voice like this, like my mom used to when she would answer the phone, remembers rules that only seem to apply to you, remembers being the only one of you, majority always seems to remind you of minority, finds myself at gentrifying coffee shop, Watches as barista makes microfoam mocha matcha mixed with almond milk blended with Monday's microaggression served. From one performative ally to another, takes my coffee black. Walks back, black minds, black business. Woman sees black body, clenches black purse, crosses black street, locks doors at crosswalk, sees black as threatening. Black boy looks in window of shop he'd be likely to be followed in. Sees reflection, remembers video, gets angry like auntie when she had to go down to them people's school because white teacher was acting like white lady on sidewalk, checks Instagram. Feed addiction. Sees black boxes again, group chat again, video again, angry again, anxious again, lights and sirens again, sightline on beeline to make sure I'm not the body that they're behind, paralyzed, possibility, paralysis, probability, paranoia, breathes, remembers that Eric wasn't allowed to, remembers that I've done nothing wrong, remembers that sometimes that doesn't matter, Philando. Tries to remember resilient before clocking into a job that will ask me to pretend like none of this ever happened. Playing mental gymnastics with my mental health to keep from becoming Vesuvius all over the top of this curated paradise. Goes home black. Puts phone on airplane mode. People wondering why they can't reach me. Friends still sending links to video. Doesn't understand that I've already seen too many. Goes to bed black. Sun rises again. Alarm clock rings. Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Sit down. Be humble. Sit down. I'd rather sleep in. Peace.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That's wonderful. I think we all need to be spicy. I mean, this time and place, right? We can't help but something that you. I'm deviating already. I told you that I would. But something that came to mind as you read the second poem. People who don't have a personal connection with Black folks, who don't see us in our regular everyday life, are sometimes surprised at how much we talk about being Black. And your poem brings to the forefront, it is constantly on our minds because we have to be conscious of where we are, of how our body is placed, of how the tone, the timbre of our voices. And it's also a joy, right? Knowing about it is always a joy, and talking about it is a joy. So it ties into, because you also mentioned microaggressions in that piece, something that I was going to ask you. In your poem, Who Are You?, which I'm going to ask you that exact question in a minute, you mentioned the microaggression of, you're so articulate. Can we just talk about that for a minute? Can we please just talk about it for a minute, sure. Right? Yeah. How do you respond? I know how I respond, but how do you respond?
In my head or in real life?
Both. I want to hear both.
So, yeah, and I'll keep it a buck with you all because, I'm post-young at this point in my life, right? I'm not old, right? Shout out to my boy Mike Benitez. He introduced me to this term. He said, "Nah, bro. I'm approaching 50. I'm just post-young." But no, the reality situation is I work in schools often. And my mom might say it like this, right? That baby Black don't crack, right? But I still look really young when I operate in those spaces. And so there are often times where people approach me and they think that I'm a student, right? And there are some times in school buildings where people mistreat me because they think that I'm a student.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, yo, that's problem number one. I don't even want to tell you that I'm the speaker because then I'm going to have to check you afterward.
Right.
But I think the piece around you're so articulate, the thing that I respond in my head is, why does that surprise you?
Right.
Like, help me to understand. I'm not mad that you're complimenting my ability to put words together. That's like my job, right? But I think the thing that upsets me, or when it crosses the line to the conversation of microaggression, is like when this body stance come with it, like, oh my gosh, right? Like, you're so, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the root of it, right, and this is what I get to with everybody, is that there are results in this world, there are behaviors in this world, and then there are beliefs. Right, and our beliefs determine our behaviors, and our behaviors determine our results, and backwards, vice versa as well. And so the thing that I often challenge people is, what was the belief that you walked in that has you surprised?
Right.
Right? So did you not expect me to be this?
Right.
Sometimes in my head I'm like, boo, they paid me to be here. Right? And I have a certain level of decorum that I operate in the world with, partly because I love to respect people, and other reasons why is because I know what reprimand looks like when I step outside of those bands. And some days I feel like dealing with that, and sometimes I don't.
Right.
And so the thing that I often settle people down with is, I say, no, don't look so surprised, right?
Right.
I appreciate your comment. Right? And I would guarantee you that there are probably people in your English classroom who can do the same thing that I can in this moment.
Yes.
Right? And so I try to handle those situations with care and grace, but first thing that shows up in my mind is like, double, right? You know? So, it happens less often now. I think it happened more often when I was younger, or when I was particularly working in one space for a long time. But now, like, I think that there's an expectation that comes along with when I show up in a space,
Right.
which I'm grateful for. But then I often watch it happen, like, for young people at slams, or for people who, like, you know, because the content has now gotten engaging, it's the first time that they've raised their hand in that classroom.
Right.
Right? And, oh my gosh, I never knew that DeAndre could, right? Like,
Right.
well, have you ever taken the time to build a relationship?
Exactly.
Is a question that I might ask. So sometimes I'm petty. Most of the time I'm respectful, but none of the time do I let it fly as if it wasn't said.
Right. Thank you. I'm a teacher, like you, and I can't turn it off. Like, I'm always a teacher. I'm her sister. You are a leader. You know, I feel like that is just your natural presence. Is leader, which encompasses teacher as well. You mentioned in your poem about Zion that, or in the introduction on your website, that your activism changed after she was born. How did your activism change?
I remember the exact moment, right? And my wife has exited the room, so she'll corroborate the story later. But I remember there was a particular protest that was happening. There were a series of protests that were happening in the Tacoma, Seattle area. So Zion was born in 2020, right? And I'm sure we're all familiar with what the landscape of 2020 looked like.
Yes.
A lot of reactionary movements that came out of that. And I remembered, right, like, so we're in the middle of a global pandemic. I have a newborn at home, right? I've always found myself in conversations around activism, and particularly leading conversations around activism. And I don't really wear boots like that, but I'm ready to put the Nikes on and be outside. And my wife looks at me and like, no, I get it. And I just want you to read the room for a second, right? And I think the way that it's transformed is that I've realized that sometimes my role is not to always be on the front line, but sometimes I have to find myself in the role of teacher. Because there are plenty of young people with energy, there are plenty of young people who know the experience well enough, and sometimes they may not know the tools necessary in order to do this effectively. And so I found myself like being uncle, right? To a lot of people who are finding themselves in those spaces. Like, hey, we're trying to demonstrate to our administration, right, that this necessity, how would you go about doing it? And I was able to do it from that space without putting my family in jeopardy, without finding myself outside, you know what I mean? And I had to wrestle with that because I felt like, you know, like I was letting folks down, you know? But the reality is, right, like sometimes we play different roles.
Right.
in that space, and I've learned that it's okay, right? In particular, one, to rest sometimes, but two, to find your new footing or new space, that your activism doesn't always have to look the same. And so I think Zion was the catalyst for that. And I'm grateful that, I was at home with my family during that time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Your shirt says trees, and there is a poem that you wrote called Trees as well. Tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah. Oh, man. Cries a little bit out the side of my eye for a second. So if y'all are not familiar with Degrees of Change, if you're not familiar with the Act 6 scholarship, I would ask, are you really from Tacoma? But I'll chill. But no, the reality of the situation, or the reality of the program, is that it started about 21 years ago now. There's a leader in the community by the name of Tim Herron. He was a math teacher at Lincoln High School. I see some Abes in the building too. I see y'all. Come through, right? But Tim was working as a math teacher, saw that there was something that was off, started a tutoring program in a garage, right? And then put the mission together of having students from our community go to college and back together, right? And so there were small cohorts of students. The research came from the Posse Foundation. And essentially when students can go to foreign spaces or places that they haven't operated in, or if I'm talking really spicy, predominantly white spaces that don't know how to love them yet, if they can go in a cohort, right, that oftentimes they can find a way to have each other's back. And the program has actually doubled, and in terms of national statistics, has doubled the graduation rate. The people in their program graduate at double the national rate of what people would in their situation elsewhere. And so I was, I think part lucky, but I always, I work too. Was lucky enough to be one of the recipients of the program. I wrote the poem for that program in 2018. It was nominated for an Emmy, and now there are a couple of my friends in here with the same things on their chests. But we live by the idea that we were the seeds that nobody expected to be trees, right? When I walked into high school my freshman year, right, there was a sub 60% graduation rate. And the expectation for brown and black bodies, if you're a brown and black male in that space, right, we're talking 55%. We could split the gym in half. And that was what said was the expectation. Local papers were calling us dropout factories. And then to see this come full circle now, you all know, shout out to the people who do work in Tacoma Public Schools, the graduation rate is north of 90%. And you can't go to a single place in our community, I guarantee you, I dare you, right, to go to a single nonprofit, to go to a school setting, to find yourself somewhere, and there's not an Act 6 scholar with their hands in that pot, right? And so I think Tim's vision of, let me provide people with access and tools and get out of the way because they actually know what their community might need, is probably the best vision in the world. And if I was to sum it up in a quick sentence, here's what I would say happened, is that there were experts in the field who found experts in the need and mentored them until the experts in the need became the experts in the field, right? And so here's our community now, right? And I'm grateful for the vision, but I also accept the responsibility to carry the torch from there.
Absolutely. And you definitely are doing that. Thank you so much for coming to Keithley to speak. There are still some of our kids, in particular our male students, who would never have considered poetry, have been ready to just check out of that whole unit, who are now seeing the link between hip hop and poetry and seeing that their story can be reflected through poetry. For you, when did you start as a poet? And did you have a mentor or someone that you looked to that guided your progression?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, Lil Bow Wow. No, I'm joking. No, but seriously, right? And so, so my brother is one of my favorite people in the world, right? He was my hero when I was young. We're 10 years apart, and I used to love going to Washington high school football games. Okay. Right? And I still have the sweater in my closet. Anyway, conversation for another time. Shout out to my brother. But he was really, really good at football. Another one of my brothers would go with me to the games, and one of the things that I would do in the stands is I would memorize songs, and then I would be prepared to rap them at the game. And I think partly my brother was using me, right, because it attracted some of the girls that he was interested in. But conversation for another time. I'll put him on the spot later. But I think really the time where I started writing original work, I didn't understand at the time what was happening, but my brother enlisted in the Air Force. And this is at the time period where we're having conflict in the Middle East, right? Which conversation for another time. And you know, like this is pre-iPhone era, right? So we're not FaceTiming folks, right? It's the long distance, like say hi to grandma, you all know, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did often is like we would send my brother things in the mail. And so I like really found this space of where like encouraging my brother or writing him like little rap songs that I had put together and I don't know at what point it turned over to poetry, but that was the first time that I really found myself invested in writing work that I felt like uplifted someone. From then, like I carried a notebook with me all the time. You know, I grew up in the south end of Tacoma, right? And so like I wasn't really showing people what they would refer to as my diary at that time. But like from then on, I think that I've always had a bug for writing. And then I got on the stage probably 18, 19, and then never turned back.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's great. Who, do you have a favorite poet?
Ooh, yes. Yeah, it's actually Lucas Moraldo. No, no, I really admire Lucas's work. But one of the things that was really special, and we shared this interaction as we came into the room, is I remember one of the very first times that I got back on stage in Tacoma. I performed at an exhibit called 30 Americans, and we were all asked to respond to a poem, and I believe Lucas was the poet laureate at the time. And I think that there's something special about planting seeds, right? Even if we don't know or we don't come back to see the harvest of or whatever else. And this is what happened, right? I'm like, I think I'm 23, maybe 24 at this time. And I performed a poem called Philosophical Questions. And like, it was kind of the first time that I heard myself roar. If y'all ever seen The Lion King before. But it's like my Simba moment where I'm like, I just can't, right? And I end up there, and like Lucas pulls up on me, and Lucas corroborate the story, right? Tell people if I'm lying. But right, and I remember the line in your poem when you said, when you were talking about free and reduced lunch. And I was like, that's a bar. But Lucas comes up to me afterward, right? And he says, man, like I'm the poet laureate right now, right? And it would be awesome if you found yourself applying for this, right? My term is getting ready to end, right? And like that seed of this position's open, it's available to you, you're talented enough to have it, right? Like 6 years later has become this, you know what I mean? And so I admire Lucas's work. I love Lucas's work. Lucas is on my Mount Rushmore of poets, right? But if I was to name, you know, other poets who I have poet crushes on, I really love Langston Hughes's work. I find myself at that intersection often. I Too Am America is one of my favorite pieces. Just navigating the world and understanding both of those things, and then having the grace and honor to walk through the space with my back straight still. And then one of my favorite poems of all time is written by an individual by the name of Lois Gale, and it's called How We Forget. And I think it's the most impactful poem that I've ever heard. And so, yeah, and put Lucas in the category with him.
I will definitely be looking that up. I have to shout out Lucas as well, because I'd applied a couple times for Poet Laureate, and I definitely was like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna try again. And he came through King's Books. Shout out to King's Books again. And he said, you know, you don't know me, but you really should apply again for Poet Laureate. And I was like, you know, who is this guy? which happens so often to the people who touch our lives, right? It's people who just step out of their comfort zone and they just encourage you or give you some words of wisdom. And I was so honored that after I did apply again and I got it, Lucas talked to me maybe for half an hour to an hour and wrote a beautiful poem for my Passing of the Torch event from Abby Murray that is a piece that will always be in my heart. Like, it's just wonderful. It's like me on paper. And it's like, how did that happen, you know? So definitely, if you don't know Lucas's work or the audio project that he's done, please look him up for sure.
Better ask somebody.
Yeah. Now, you, Emmy nominated, sir, have been able to make this your career.
Yeah.
And you give your everything to your family, to your community, to your writing. How are you going to find time for yourself during this?
Not in front of people.
Yeah, because we're going to hold you to it. I don't know your wife, but we're going to hold him to it.
Yeah, no. So shout out to other community members, right? There's a call I have every single Friday morning. Sometimes we miss it because we be sleeping in. But every Friday morning with two of my brothers. One is my brother John Gaines, and the other one is my brother Antonio McLemore. And we check in with each other, and we ask each other 3 questions, right? How have you been this week in your business? How have you been this week as a father? How have you been this week as a husband? And we just spend time in community with each other, sharpening each other. And one of the things that's shown up, John, stop me if I'm telling everybody business, right? But one of the things that has shown up, right, is the necessity for rest. And I don't know, this feels weird to say aloud, right? But I think a lot of us may find ourselves in this bucket. Like, I don't know how to rest. And I think the reason being is because I don't know that I was ever allowed to, right? And I just, right, like, I'm roundabouting your question, but I think, like, you know, sometimes I have to hear other people have the experience to know that I'm not doing it myself, or forgive me for the terminology, but to know that I'm not crazy, right? And I think when I was growing up, like, I was taught consistently to compete with other black men. And the moment that you fall asleep or the moment that you rest, somebody is coming to surpass you. There's only 12 spots on the football team, or on the basketball team. There's only 11 playing spots on the football team. Right. All right, there's only 2 of you can be sprinters, 3 of them, right? And I think that narrative of scarcity put me in a position where I felt like I always had to outwork somebody. And I don't know that I've learned quite particularly how to put that down. But the thing that has been so beneficial in the calls is that when I learn, instead of trying to compete with other people in my space, that I can collaborate with them, then the burdens that we have to face become lighter. And so I think the way, you know, and this might be a bit of a cop-out answer, but the way that I find myself resting, or the way that I plan to take care of myself, right, is falling backward into community. You know what I mean? And I try to give that, like, vivid expression, because sometimes it's really hard for me to, like, to just let my hands go, right? Or to let myself fall back, and to trust, right? That if I take this time off, that somebody else will fill the void. Right. And so in all aspects of my life, that's been something that I've tried to practice, but I don't know that I'm there yet, right? And I don't feel the pressure to have it solved.
That's great.
Yeah, but as it comes, I'm a chill.
Yeah.
I'm good at taking naps, though.
Okay.
So I'm here for that. Right?
Well, I am post young. Yeah. And I do have to say that this role has been phenomenal. And it was the thing that finally, and with support of Chevy Chung, who is amazing, finally got me to the point where I could start saying no to things, you know? And I know you say yes to everything and you show up, but you know, it did, and it gave me time to rest and to go back to the writing. I mean, because I don't know if this happens to you, but when I don't write for a while, I start to feel it in my body. Like something isn't right, I'm not resting right, and then I'm like, oh, I haven't been writing. Yeah. So what is your writing practice like?
Can I say something to that point, and then I'll answer the writing part?
Yes, please.
So big shout out to my homie Zach Varnell, who works for the Element Schools. But Zach put me on some game, and I think this is true of both athletes and artists, right? And so Zach is a cyclist, and you all are like, dang, where's he going with this? I promise, right? We'll come back around. So Zach is a cyclist, and here's the thing that he told me. He said what most people do when they're exercising, and the mistake that they make is that they consistently exert their bodies, they provide no space for rest, and then they think that they're going to be more effective, get buffer, get faster, get whatever. He said that the thing that actually happens is when you take the time to rest, your muscles actually expand, and it's only in recovery that you become better, right? And so like if you don't take the time, right? And I think that the same thing is true of artists, right? Like the beauty of our work is when we stop and reflect.
Yeah.
And if we don't take the time for reflection or we don't take the time for rest, everything that we put out into the world, whether we have a consistent writing practice or not, is going to feel forced,
Right.
right? And I found myself creating the worst works when I'm exhausted and I'm on commission and I have to put a deadline out, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, like I'm trying to tell myself while we're standing in front of people how important rest and reflection is. As far as my work goes, I'm a whiteboard writer.
Really?
I throw noodles at stuff, right? Like, this is the perfect picture. I had to put together some poems for the Smithsonian exhibit when it came to town, The Men of Change. And shout out to Mary Michael, she let me into the space early while I was commissioning the pieces. I had my phone in one hand. I had like a bit of a notepad just kind of stretched out, you know, the big easel markers. And I had Erykah Badu on and on my AirPods. And so I literally danced through the exhibit, right? And as lines came, just kind of wrote them on paper. And I don't ever again in my life want to have to write in a linear fashion. Because I don't think effective work comes from intro, supporting paragraphs to conclusion, right? Like that's why I teach creative writing and not composition. Bless those hearts that do. But like I feel like the question I'm asking myself is, what story do I have the moral responsibility to tell? What lines land that story? We can worry about composition and construction later.
Right.
Right. And so that's my process, right? I dance, I sing, I party, I whiteboard. And then stuff happens.
How long does it take you to memorize? I have a deficient working memory. So I tried it for a while because often when you show up, people expect you to have memorized the piece. But I can't memorize and recite my work. How long does it take you? Or is it just a natural, because do you just riff off of lines or?
Yeah, I would say that it doesn't take very long, but I think the thing that people don't give themselves enough credit for is that your body actually has muscle memory and your tongue operates in the same way, right? Can I prove it to the room? Is that fair?
Please.
This is a gamble, right? But if you all hear me say, I would love you anyway.
Even if you cannot stay.
Come on, right? You all get what I'm saying? So how many of you knew that you all were getting ready to sing Sweet Thing before you walked in the room? Nobody knew, right? But on command, we were ready to say those lyrics. And so what I offer is like, you know it. Like, I think the science behind it, and don't quote me on this because I won't be able to tell you the researcher, but I've gotten this secondhand, is that like it takes you 17 times over for you to have something memorized. But it takes longer time for you to have the confidence of understanding that you know it, right? And I only knew, and y'all don't tell the people who I commissioned this piece for, I don't want to tell you what piece it was, but I was getting ready to perform at a national conference. I had artist procrastinated, right? So like I wasn't trying to put it off, but the writing wasn't flowing the way that it was supposed to. I had finished a poem 2 days beforehand, had to go on stage fully memorized, couldn't bring my phone, couldn't bring paper, any of those things. And before I got on stage, like I was in the room crying and fumbling and all these things. Like it was a really hard time in my life, right? And I remember just calling my sister like, yo, your voice is the only thing getting me through today. And it wasn't just because of the poem, it's like where my life was at that time. I get on stage, right? I straighten my back, right? I get ready and I just let it go. And once the nerves went out of the room, my body remembered that I knew the piece. And so I would say like no more than 2 days max, right? I'm not special, right? Like I'm sharing that. I know all of our brains work differently, but like I think you can memorize something in 2 days, as proved by Rufus and Shaka Khan showing up in the room.
All right. Do you have any questions or anything like? You're like, this is the one thing that I definitely wanted to say tonight. We have 2 minutes.
Yeah. So here is, we have 2 minutes, dang. If y'all see the cane come out to take me out, anyway. But no, so like I really mean this when I say this, is that artists have been really impactful in my life. I walked into an honors English class in the 9th grade. There was an individual by the name of Ronnie Gordon. And Ronnie's still in the community now. I believe he works with Whole Child in the Tacoma School District. Ronnie's a phenomenal human being. He always had on a nice pair of ones. Right? Had locks that went down his back, always had on a clean pair of Levi's, and always had a smile for folks. If you all will find out why that's funny in a second if you look at me on sitting in this chair, right? Because I reflect him often. Sometimes I see more of Ronnie Gordon in myself than I do me.
Yeah. Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, he's inspired me to teach. He's inspired me to write. He was the first person that told me, right, like, this might be worse. Like, you might want to pursue this. And what my hope is as Poet Laureate, right, is that I get to be that same mirror for young people who might not find themselves here. Yeah. And so, right, like, I really hope that that's the outcome of this. I think that leadership mostly is modeling. And so that's what I plan to model. And the other thing, and I'll say this with all of the bravado necessary, and might be a part where people stop liking me, but there are some parts in Tacoma that I would go that have felt familiar that now I get looked at as if I'm stranger. Come on, somebody decided in the back, right? But I think this is really important to say about all arts in general, right? Is please don't find yourself erasing the voices of brown and black community members who have been here for generations. I know that it's so important. Like, those stories have to remain here. Those stories have to be told. And as we're changing the names of schools and streets and areas, and right, like, and I get it. I understand that all of those things are for good reason. What I'm also saying is, let's not find ourselves in a position where we're pushing out the people whose voices have shaped the culture that we've lived in.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a poem about that to be written later. But those are my 2 things on the docket as Poet Laureate, and I say those aloud to hold me accountable to it. We have to have consistent spaces, primarily for the voices of individuals who are at the risk of being pushed out of this community, to keep those counter stories alive. And there has to be space for young people, to be able to express their voices in the same way that Tim created space for us when we were young people through the Act 6 program. So y'all hold me accountable, but y'all also please find yourselves as my siblings in arms in that conversation. Yeah, and let's work together to create space for the voices that have to remain here.
Nice. Well, thank you, Christian. Thank you for your grace, for your voice, for showing how humble you are and bringing your truth. We love it spicy. And also thank you for honoring teachers and other creatives. I have to give a shout out for 2 of my teachers who are watching from Pennsylvania, Mr. Bob Eldridge and Ms. Joan Cuccinata, Dr. Joan Cuccinata. Be teachers. Be teachers in your lives. Be the leaders that you wanted to have, that you hoped would guide you, and give space. Thank you, everybody.